Hi, Dr. Siri. Thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Sarah.
Yes. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about clinical research, but before we dive into that, maybe give us a little bit about your background and what you're doing today with your clinic.
I practice in Central Illinois. I'm an allergist and immunologist. I also have certification in internal medicine. I got into this field because I have probably every allergic disease, is what I tell patients. And it was a really self-interest, but because this is a primarily outpatient-based specialty, we didn't really learn about it much in medical school or even throughout residency. So I stumbled upon this as a specialty, and certainly it fits the picture very well, that I can be interested in the diseases that affect me, affect my family, and honestly, 40% of Americans. And largely, I get to handle and discuss and evaluate children through adulthood. We tell people we take care of patients from birth through 101. So it's a really great opportunity to also incorporate many disease processes, to have a broad range of knowledge, and to also attack different organs, because certainly the immune system reaches every part of our body. And lastly, there really are some really innovative medications in terms of the immunology space. So from a science standpoint, intellectually, super exciting. So our practice is in Central Illinois, and we have 3 main locations. I run a practice with about 9 to 10 providers. We see a lot of patients that come through with all sorts of things. And it really has been a really fantastic and terrific journey. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine a lot of, professional satisfaction of just being able to help patients and alleviate, a lot of their discomfort and pain of like, yes, I got it. Like we figured this one out, now we're going to work on this next piece and things like that.
Yes, and certainly there's also the curative aspects, but in allergy immunology in particular, there's also a lot of preventative aspects. How do we prevent disease? How do I prevent immune issues? How do I prevent food allergies from happening? How do I prevent my child who is in that atopic march, meaning that they started with atopic dermatitis or food allergy, and now how do I prevent them from getting to things like asthma and more severe symptoms? So it is really incorporates both the preventative and the curative aspect, which is nice.
Yeah, that is nice. Well, you do clinical research and you're very active in that space. How did you get started doing that with your private practice?
The experience stemmed from actually fellowship. Many of us during training, when we do our residency and then our advanced subspecialty fellowship, get involved in different things. And I was involved in clinical research. And then I knew that going into a private practice or a practice that I wanted to be involved. So very early on, when I had worked for a large multi-specialty clinic, I asked to be involved in clinical research. And then when I went to start my own practice, then we took those experiences and just established a center. And so that's how I got started. So I've been doing clinical research for over 20 years, and it is really has been a fortunate journey in terms of the ability to help patients in not just in individual ways, but in larger ways when you're developing medication that really reaches many, many patients.
And what is it like personally? What is it that you like about research? Do you like the academic and the science piece about it? What draws you like as an individual to be a good clinician in the research space?
What's not to like is what I say.
Well, some people don't like tax returns and accounting, right? So it's kind of like, what do you think is like the personality draw of why that really draws you in as a person?
Most physicians inherently are curious people. So and we're scientists and we want to figure out why. And so when you participate in clinical research or research in general, you're trying to answer questions. Most of these, of course, that we participate in are pharmaceutical sponsored, but you're on the cutting edge of medicine. You get to learn about the new innovative things. You get to learn about the science behind these things, including the science behind some of the diseases that you're treating that perhaps you didn't know before, because this is a little bit more, especially in the modern area, not so much bench to bedside, but bedside to bench, meaning that we are taking innovations that have been developed by drug companies and applying them to some of the diseases that we didn't really have good names or categories for. So it's really neat seeing things both ways. And so from that intellectual perspective, I think that it has been very satisfying. On top of that, I think that the person who's attracted to this kind of work really is a little bit neurotic. I hate to say that. It is a positive word to me. I enjoy having that word be applied to me, who likes things in buckets, but at the same time likes to think in the bigger picture of what are we doing for science, for technology, and advancing medicine and care.
Well, and so you said you worked on research in your fellowship, and then when you were part of a larger practice, and you knew you wanted to bring this to your clinic when you started out on your own. What were some of the first steps that you took, leveraging those experiences? But it seems really hard to get started on your own.
You would think that it seems hard, and I think the daunting part is that it's just like learning a new language.
Okay.
Or traveling to another country. When you don't know, you don't know. And I think for some people, there may be a little trepidation there. But once you delve into it, you read some articles, you talk to some people, you look at your travel books.
Yeah. You've been there before, right? Like kind of get some mentorship along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it becomes easier. And of course, you're not going to pick the hardest study to do. But I think when you're open, engaged, and, as it stands, the world needs more investigators. We need more people doing clinical research. So people are really willing to help you get started. And, the way that I think anybody should get started is really doing some easy studies. And what easy studies means is that they're not necessarily developing new drugs, that they're basically doing survey studies, observational studies, etc. Like dips people's toes into research. And then you get to learn the whole language around regulation and protocols. And those kind of things. And so then it's easy, and it's no different than, if you really wanted to travel robustly internationally, start with someplace close by, like Florida.
Well, yes, certainly. I like how you compared it to a language, right? There are definitely nuances, and I would say even cultural languages, cultural norms of, a vast network of different people who have different types of experiences. How, starting with something that is commercial, and you talked about doing kind of the survey, how do you match that piece? So I've decided I'm going to dip my toe in this water. Maybe I have a mentor, I've kind of looked over, participated in fellowship and maybe other studies. How do you go about that matching process of finding the studies that work for your clinic?
Yeah, and I also wanted to go back and speak to the fact of how do you get started? So I think that just speaking to industry partners when you're at a conference, when you have sales representatives come to your office, engage with the medical science liaisons. You can also go to different websites, et cetera, and look for studies and things like that. That most people want to make sure that the investigators are prepared and can do a good job. So there is going to be some background to that. And so what that means is that, could you potentially do a study all on your own as one physician? Yes, you could. It's a lot of administrative work. There's a burden there. And so it is easier if you hire someone. And if somebody with experience would be great. But if they don't have experience, then it's, basically we will be learning together. But the first thing is understanding the regulations, making sure that you have the correct training and certification in order to conduct a clinical study. And that typically means understanding what clinical research entails and how to discuss an ethics around human subjects. Then to, if people are not really familiar with the process, they can't necessarily create a financial plan per se, but it's not expensive to get started. Really, the biggest expense is going to be hiring someone. And the rest of it comes as it goes, depending on the protocol that you might get. There may be some equipment. Some sponsors are helpful in delivering some of that equipment with you. Many, for example, observational studies, it's simply the things you already have, piece of paper, a pencil, a computer, blood pressure cuff, etc. And then really it's about time. So whether people are starting a new process, they're cooking a new recipe, they are starting something in their practice where they are implementing a new program, it's researching, developing the protocols, and then having the right people. So having all those things in a row, having other things such as legal and making sure that you have insurances, and then you can get started. And so I don't think it's different than starting any business per se. We just have to do a little research to get started. Mm-hmm.
And you had talked about that staffing component. Who is that generally that first staffing hire? A clinical research assistant? I mean, is that the first one to help you get launched off the ground?
Yes, for many people, we rely a lot on our clinical research coordinators, but
Okay.
certainly if you are getting started and you're learning the process with them, they could just be a research assistant. Somebody who's obviously trained, has done this before is helpful. They'll know the language, things like that. But that may not be the case. It could just be a nurse, a medical assistant, somebody with medical background who can help you. Certainly there are components where you have to file a lot of documents. So somebody in your practice who, or someone you hire, who's not only medically inclined, but also fairly organized. I like to compare it to when you have a child who's applying for a college and you have to have all the check boxes. And so this is a lot like clinical research. So somebody who's good at that is really helpful to you.
I want to say that's actually medical versus with accounting, right? Like we're very checkboxy type people that love things to be organized. So definitely understanding that skill set. So you talked a little bit about the staffing and a little bit about the infrastructure of, potentially you have a lot of, for some of those earlier, more established studies, you have a lot of those tools already at your disposal. What is that, like, how do you evaluate kind of the budget as it's coming in? Are you looking at, the price per patient or, the payout per patient and what can be reimbursed? Talk to us a little bit about the budgeting, because I love the budgeting piece.
Right. As you know, it can be quite complex. And so many people just have a general gestalt of this. But if you are thinking about your structure, the overhead, and the most of the overhead, obviously you already have a clinic space if you're practicing. You already have a lot of that. But the main issue is going to be the staffing. And so the staffing really is your main cost in this case, more than anything else. So it's time and people. And so when you think about that, you have to think, how many studies can the person who's assisting you help you with, and how many studies can you personally supervise? So that's really important because you are responsible for all the studies as a principal investigator. So how many can you handle? What is the bandwidth? And then what is the bandwidth of your clinical research coordinator? And then we think about if you're being offered multiple studies, are they short studies? Are they 3-month studies? Are they 5-year studies? Is there going to be steady income for the next 5 years, or is this only a short-term project? Are we filling our research with a bunch of 3-month studies in a year, or are we doing some longer term, or maybe there's a combination of the two? And then we have to think about the overhead, like in terms of the carve out of that space that you have, how much of the lights, the electricity, the space, the waste, etc., and all that overhead stuff really belongs to that clinical research. So there are a lot of different components to it. And so that's what we generally think about. But the main factors are, can you do a good job in supervising the studies you have? And then secondarily, can you fill the study, which means that they're looking for certain people, you revise and you look at I apologize, you review and you look at the protocol, and then can you get the patients that will fit into your study? And so obviously this is human participants who are volunteers. And so we have to be able to have our customers desire to enroll in the study. And if we can't pick the right studies for the right patient set, or the right patient set doesn't belong in our studies, and we don't really have a way to bring them into our practice by recruitment, by advertising, etc., then we'll have a failed study. So really it's about assessing who your population is, what you can hire, and then obviously, the bandwidth of yourself and the practice people that are probably the two essential features.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that patient recruitment and kind of knowing your population, and potentially, we've talked about, is there opportunity to partner with other physicians who may not be into clinical research? Well, what does their population look like? Because there be some sharing and referrals of patients to help fill some of those studies.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and there really are a very small proportion of patients in the United States who are participating in clinical research. And I can understand to some degree why, because perhaps, if there's a therapy already available, people, don't necessarily want to participate. But I think a lot of people are engaged and interested. I mean, they're very highly regulated by the FDA. There can be some, risks and things like that, but mostly by the time it gets to human participants, many of those things have been vetted out as far as, animals, things like that. But these are still safety studies that people have to participate in. So I think that there is hesitation, but especially for diseases where there's not a lot of treatments and people are struggling, they're looking for clinical research opportunities to participate in. And, they don't, patients don't have to pay typically to be part of a trial. They don't even have to have insurance. And then there is usually remuneration as far as like time and travel. So the patient does get paid something to participate. And so I don't think people do it for that reason. I think they are looking to seek treatments that basically will be more effective for their disease process. And so if we could get more investigators to engage in doing clinical research, or refer them to centers, or offer it to patients, I think we'd be in a much better space for drug development, but also patient care.
Absolutely. You had talked a little bit about, it's the staff, it's the resources, a little bit on the space, but again, most of the time you have a clinic already. You're just doing a little bit of carve out. What are some things that you do to help you balance, clinical patient care and, managing all the studies that you do? Do you have any workflow secrets, or you just have a fabulous staff, which I know you have a great staff. You have a very great team, very well established team.
I don't think it's secrets. I think it's being detail oriented, having good people with you, and getting there. As you know, a hiring and firing process. Getting there, training, taking a very hands-on approach. And I think people are always surprised when they visit our site, how present I am. And so even though that I may not have time to speak with them at that moment, like I'm always buzzing around. And then when there's an issue, like I directly email them. So I think they're always surprised, like, when they call and then I'm picking up the phone. But having presence, obviously that is part of the responsibility of being an investigator, is being present and available. And so I think having that mentality that this is ultimately your responsibility no matter what, is really important. Mm-hmm.
What do you think is some of the biggest misconceptions of physicians of getting into clinical research? Is it that it's too hard, too expensive? What do you think is holding people back?
I think that one of the things is that, as it is with patients, that people think that patients are guinea pigs. And they're really not guinea pigs. Again, highly regulated FDA. They have to review the protocol multiple times and approve it before it even gets to that stage. These are large pharmaceutical companies that carry a high risk. They're spending millions of dollars in order to develop new drugs for patients. So it's not that, they're just nilly-willy giving patients something that has not been already evaluated. So I think that's some of the perception. So that's one. Two, as far as clinical research, I think they think that there's extraordinary time burden. And there certainly can be. It depends on the study, it depends on what you're doing, et cetera. There can be a time burden. However, anything that you do that's worthwhile is going to take time. And so I think that also from clearly a financial viewpoint, I think that physicians are worried that will cut into the time that they are taking care of their practice, their patients, and then also their employees. And so if you have a different revenue stream or business stream, then perhaps they won't be able to spend time on the things that they know and love, which I understand. But if they're interested in delving into this kind of scientific world, and if they have the time and capacity, it's very rewarding. And so I think only the physician can figure out whether or not this is something they want to incorporate. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Well, and, from a financial perspective, I do like to see medical practices and physicians have multiple revenue streams coming in from different ways. And, when you have a team of other providers who do great care as well, right? Like you're available to them to troubleshoot when needed, but relying heavily on your team. But from a financial perspective, it's, not all your eggs are in one basket. You're not only doing clinical care, right? You have the opportunity for speaking and research. And I think it just makes the overall value of the enterprise even greater. And especially if you like doing it, you're very passionate about research. So, no one's forcing you to do this. I think it's just a little overwhelming to get started for a lot.
I have to say that you're absolutely right. Having different processes or streams or things that you take care of. I mean, certainly, I think in medical practice, we are really driven into, thinking about only patient care. But in order to, I think, sustain ourselves and our practice and be able to offer care to the patients that we already serve, plus others, we have to think about surviving as a practice. So the financials are important. And this is very well illustrated over the pandemic when we stopped seeing patients, but we still had clinical research studies. And so there have been years that clinical research did better than the practice. And so I feel that that is important to note.
Absolutely. Can you share a story where participating in a clinical trial had a meaningful impact for a patient?
Oh my gosh, I have so many stories. However, we participated in the very initial trials for a specific medication that now, that was the first FDA-approved medication to treat atopic dermatitis. That was so easy to enroll. we opened up the study. Nobody, including the drug company, had anticipated the demand for these studies, frankly. And people would come out of the woodwork and they were like, I've been suffering from atopic dermatitis for many, many years, and sometimes 20 years. And they had absolutely no way of treating themselves beyond the topicals that were given, and maybe some other medications that we use systemically there for cancer and things like that that were a bit dangerous. And so when these clinical trials opened up, there were so many patients, it was hard to get them in fast enough. And then as soon as basically they were able to take the real medication as opposed to a placebo, because there's always a window where there's a placebo for some patients because they have to assess whether or not these medications work. And then there are patients who took the real medication. Visually so impactful, from having severe, moderate to severe atopic dermatitis to clear skin. And people have never felt that in 20 years. They had never had clear skin. And the impact that made on people's lives, their sleep, their itch, their quality of lives was just really impactful.
Yeah. And that's fun to see, right? And without that clinical research, we wouldn't have that on the market today.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about your next venture. Tell us a little bit about what you're thinking in the clinical research space.
I have benefited so much from clinical research just as a person, and people are always asking me, we know that you're involved heavily in it. How do I get started? And so I think that we decided to try to formalize this in the next research venture, which is creating a research network to help, again, address some of those needs, bringing people in who have never done research before, teaching them how to do that. Targeting specifically areas that maybe have an underserved population, whether that means rural, inner city, or just special populations, to help bring in patients into clinical research. And the reason for that is that patients do trust their doctors, and they should trust their doctors. And if the doctor's involved in research, it helps to bring and elevate that opportunity for the patients, but also the practice in terms of the knowledge that they receive from participating in a trial. So I think that, if we could get more and more local physicians to be involved in research, whether they are referring to a site or whether they're participating directly, I think it's a really great opportunity. So that is the next venture, is let's see if we can create a network and teach physicians how to do research so they can do it well.
And as soon as we can share more about that, we'll make sure that it's in our notes and our podcast notes, and some connection pieces right there. I know that research is something that you are passionate about. You love doing it. I love hearing the stories of, this worked and, we changed lives in this area. When you're talking about the patients, I just, yes, physically clear skin, but also, clear confidence, right? Like you feel better about yourself when you don't feel crummy. I do feel, physicians in general, you don't get the best of people. Right? People aren't necessarily coming to visit you because they feel good. There's something, you don't feel good, you're crabby. I know that I'm not the best when I show up at my physician's door of, I just need to feel better. And so thank you for all that you do for your community. I know your patients are so grateful.
Yes, it's really a pleasure to speak to you, and hopefully your audience will be convinced that they've got to do research now.
Yes. And what's one lasting thing? Just get started. How could they, they can connect, through potentially this research network, and they'll have that. But what lasting piece of advice would you encourage someone to get started in clinical research?
I think really the first piece is, we have so much information available to us at our fingertips. If you're interested in clinical research, just, Google, how do I get involved? How do I start clinical research? And that'll start you on the path. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I know you're a Chat GPT person, so they can Google and Chat GPT and see what kind of answers they get. No, I think there's lots of opportunities out there and lots of information on how to get started. So thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining me on Profits in Practice. If you found today's episode helpful, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a fellow physician. Your financial wellness is just as important as your patient's health, and we're here to help you thrive. Connect with us via our website at webcfo.com. Thanks for joining us.